Now we're going to go straight to Britain. Jonathan Sacerdoti, our i24 news correspondent, you're in London this morning. Of course, Western leaders have started to arrive to the NATO summit in Wales this morning. Representatives are going to be meeting at a Celtic Manor resort to discuss issues ranging, of course, from the increasing tensions in Ukraine, but also, of course, a strategy against the Islamic State, something that the U.S. President Barack Obama said just last week. There is no strategy as of now. Jonathan, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you.
So now that we heard David Cameron speaking in Parliament yesterday, saying that needs to be some kind of response, is there a coalition response or a unanimous kind of idea of what needs to be done within the British government?
Well, there's certainly some unity between the government itself and the opposition Labour Party. They agree on many things now, which is a big difference from this time last year when they debated whether or not to intervene in Syria. Now there's an agreement that we should not be cowed in this country by the barbarous terrorists of ISIS, using the words of the Prime Minister. And there is also an agreement that there may be some case for actual intervention, though, of course, that would be limited. And the precise details of what sort of intervention that would be have not been revealed. But there is now an indication also that in certain situations it might be possible for the Prime Minister to decide that Britain would get involved militarily without asking Parliament. There are certain cases he feels which would allow him to do that. So this is a slight shift in the discussion that's been going on so far as to whether or not Britain would get involved to a further extent than it has already.
But now that Britain is also held captive by supposedly ISIS forces, are the government looking towards also the public? Is there a public outcry to do something, or is it still something that's being discussed only in the halls of Westminster?
Well, aid worker David Haynes was taken prisoner or hostage 19 months ago, but his family were told to keep it secret. So until now, he's not somebody that the British public have heard very much about. However, it's been known that he was missing, and of course the threat to kill him next in that gruesome video has been taken seriously here. So the public is torn, because the British public, like the US public, doesn't forget easily the sacrifice that was made in previous wars in the region. And yet there is a sense that with 500 jihadi fighters, British-born jihadi fighters, apparently taking part in the wars with ISIS in Iraq and in Syria, at the moment there is a huge risk to national security that those people might return here with the skills and training that they have from there and pose a serious threat to national security in the United Kingdom. So it's a matter of being able to balance these two concerns. One, not wanting to get involved in an open-ended and difficult war in the region again, one which people doubt we may be able to win and doubt we may be able to make a big difference in, and also being able to satisfy the requirements of the country to keep its citizens at home safe against the threat of this sort of jihadi intent returning to our shores.
And speaking about, of course, the NATO summit that's going to be commencing this morning in Wales, there's going to be a lot of issues that are going to be discussed. The main headline issue was to be Ukraine and Russia. What is the British position as of now towards Putin? We've seen a kind of a ping-pong of rhetoric between the United States and Russia. Britain has taken, of course, the Western position, but it's been quieter than the United States.
Well, this morning's Times newspaper here in the UK carries an op-ed written jointly by David Cameron and Barack Obama, and they state what their position is, which is obviously united in the sense that they're writing this together. They talk about how when NATO last met in Britain in 1990, the Cold War was ending, as Margaret Thatcher and President Bush Sr. pledged to continue to stand together, they write. Many might have thought that a new era of peace and prosperity would make this great security alliance less relevant. But today, NATO, they say, is as vital to our future as it ever has been. They say that they're meeting at a time when the world faces many dangerous and evolving challenges. One of those, of course, is, as they put it, illegal self-declared annexation of Crimea and Russian troops on Ukrainian soil. So the two are certainly talking a united message. They're trying to put across a strength message as they go into these talks in Newport. And it's clear that the world has two main issues to deal with, and NATO has two main issues to decide on as they discuss today. That is, of course, what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, and, of course, what is going on with what they describe in this article as an arc of extremism from North Africa through to the Middle East. Both of these serious world problems that Britain is now trying to talk tough on, definitely in agreement and in accord with the United States.
Jonathan, stay with us. Arad, of course, these two different topics, as Jonathan put up, can we rate them? What's more important to the West right now, or are they equally important to this Western bloc?
They are equally important to the Western Bloc. I think that the Russian issue is easier to solve because the ingredients are there. The ISIS threat is much more blur at the moment. There needs to be many concessions regarding the principles of Western society in order to fight ISIS, but they are equally important because they both pose a certain threat on the mere existence of Western values.
And here in Israel, mostly officials will be looking at the NATO summit. Will they, speak about us, about the Israeli appropriation of land in Gush Etzion just a few days ago? U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry did speak with Netanyahu yesterday to talk about it. Is this going to be
the Israeli government wants us to think that they spoke about ISIS.
Right.
This is what they said, how to cooperate regarding ISIS. Well, I'm sure that this will come up. I don't know if there will be an official statement because this is not a NATO issue, but I believe that all leaders that will convene today, or most of them, would expect the Israeli government not to disturb the fight against ISIS and not to disturb the issues against or with Russia.
Jonathan, just a few words from you, of course, about the go-ahead for the appropriation of land in the Gush Etzion settlement block near Bethlehem. It received international condemnation, also from the UK government.
That's right. Of course, the UK government is always very quick when there's an announcement of new Israeli Jewish building in the disputed territories to condemn that, and it surely did the same this time round. Of course, whether or not this will be high up on the agenda in the NATO discussions, it's very unlikely. Obama and Cameron made it very clear in this op-ed in the Times that really the two great threats to the world's security that need consideration are to do with Russia and to do with ISIS. And it seems that while they may disapprove of these sorts of announcements on the part of Netanyahu and the Israeli government, what they're really concentrating on now are these threats to their own security at home and threats to other NATO member states that seem, in the grand scheme of things, to be much higher up on the list, which may in some ways mean that this particular story about the building of new developments might in fact slip off the news agenda to some extent, though it hasn't gone unnoticed, of course.
Jonathan Sacerdoti, thank you. Arad?
With your permission, one final sentence. I want to take it from where Jonathan said. I think that both Obama and Cameron see these things here in the appropriation of land here as a threat to Israel rather than a threat to the world or to the international community.
And therefore, it's not a NATO subject per se, but it's more something that...
But it is a concern.
It is a concern. Arad Neal, thank you for joining us. Jonathan Sacerdoti there in London, thank you for joining us. Coming up next, we're going to, of course, continue to speak about Ukraine and Russia. Is there a ceasefire agreement on hand? We'll speak about all the details while, of course, world leaders meet in NATO. Next up are the headlines.